Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Gene. Yeah, Gene blessed me with an Astros World Champion t-shirt after they defeated my Yankees and then the Dodgers, where I live here in Los Angeles. So yeah, I'm a big fan. And thank you for all of the kindness about the awards and the introduction, Gene. The Cloak Millen Award is named, as some of you might already know, for Ken Cloak and Richard Millen, who are two of my greatest mentors as I was coming up and learning everything I could about this profession. And being given that award in their names is amazing to me. I mean, it's just, I'm, and then the second thing I did was call my mother and say, I'm too young for a Lifetime Achievement Award. So anyhow, we've got to pitch off to, a first pitch to kick off, a first pitch to beat here. So let's get to work. Part of me wishes the mics were on so that I could ask why some of you want to learn more about anger. So while I'm starting off here, if you want to put some of that in the chat, Gene can share it with us. But why don't we just get started and talk about what anger is. Whoa, look at me in the middle of all this. As a mediator, you'd think I'd be comfortable being in the middle of all this anger. And by the way, that's one of the things we do as mediators. We basically, mediators are born or they're trained, right? It's nature or nurture. And I tell people all the time, if you see two people fighting and you have the desire somehow to get in the middle of that, then there may be something wrong with you. And you also may be born to be a mediator. I was at a dinner once in Washington, D.C., a sixth game of a hockey playoff just let out. And it was really clear to those of us who had just eaten dinner next door and were leaving the restaurant as this Coliseum place emptied out that they had served beer straight through the fourth quarter, because you could tell by the way people were stumbling out and all of that. And you know, at first we thought it was kind of funny and entertaining, and they had the foam hockey stick hats and, you know, all sorts of things like that. And before long, they started squaring up on the sidewalk. F you, no F you. And they start marching closer to each other. And there are a dozen of them or so on each side. And these are big hockey dudes in hockey jerseys and all that sort of thing. And I had dinner with 4 mediator friends, most of whom Gene knows that night. Don't know where you were that night, Gene, not to join us, but my friends all went this way and I went this way. And I got in the middle of it. And I diffused everything and, you know, calmed everybody down and made them laugh for a minute and sent them off. And my friends looked at me afterwards and said, "You're nuts, like you could have gotten killed." I'm like, no, this is actually what I do for a living. You know, it was funny because they do too. But they didn't have that desire, that reflex to go step into the middle of a conflict. And I did. So because of that, we do tend to see people at their worst because we're stepping into an ongoing conflict. We're joining them at some point where they either work in the same workplace and have stopped talking to each other, and maybe worse than that, or they're in civil litigation and they've been doing depositions and discovery and all this stuff for months and completely villainized the other, and they hate each other, and that's when they bring us in. So hello to all my mediator friends. I see so many of you on the photos here, and thanks for joining. I'm flattered that some of you want to continue learning as accomplished as some of you are. And to all my Bearcats, it's great to be amongst you again. Mr. Roberts actually gave me a plaque and award that resourceful I would have here to hold up for you. But it was called Amicus Bearcatus, which is fake Latin for a friend of the Bearcats. Anyhow, I'm glad to be here with y'all. Let's talk about anger. What is anger and what isn't it? It's not usually what we think it is. We tend to think of it like an outburst, like rage, out of control, all those sorts of things. Actually, what it is, it's a secondary emotion. So anger is not unbridled emotion. It's a protective and defense mechanism that comes out to protect, let me move myself out of here, against fear or hurt. So the idea is, if we are scared or if we're hurt and we need that to stop, anger is our warrior energy that we bring forward to back down the attacking enemy so that they'll stop hurting us or scaring us. As soon as we realize intellectually that that's what anger is, the sooner we can figure out how to deal with it. Most of us think, wow, that person's really angry. In a minute here, we're going to talk about what else you might think instead that might help you deal with that anger. So let's remember that anger covers fear or hurt, always. It's a reflex response, it's a protection mechanism, and it's usually an involuntary choice because we are so scared or hurt that our rational brain can't actually process it, and our animal instinct comes out to protect us from hurt. The secret to getting past anger, awkwardly floating around the screen. This is my first time doing this part of it. It's kind of fun. The secret to getting past anger is to speak indirectly to the fear of the hurt. And what does that mean? Like if somebody says, you're such and such, and I'm going to kill you if you don't stop, whatever. If we say, oh, aren't you cute, you little hurt puppy, that might get us punched in the face, right? But we can say to them something that indirectly acknowledges the underlying emotion. So we can say to them something like, wow, this is really upsetting you. Or we can say, holy cow, I didn't realize this was that big a deal. Hold on a minute. But we can acknowledge how important it is to them. Because one of the reasons people invoke their anger when it's voluntary, as opposed to involuntary, when they're choosing to ratchet it up, it's because they're not feeling heard. And they feel like they have to say it louder and louder and bang the desk or scream or wave something in the air, because subconsciously, they're just desperately needing to be heard. They have to have feedback from you that you've heard them. Now, most of us would say, I heard them the first time, like they didn't have to raise their voices. The trick is they didn't get that you heard them the first time. You didn't say to them, oh, I hear what you're saying, so they can disconnect and ratchet back down their anger. Doug Knoll, who you had 3 weeks ago, I think, Gene, does a wonderful program, two wonderful programs. He wrote a book on de-escalating anger. And he does a program now, if you can find it online, it's Doug, N-O-L-L, Knoll. If you didn't attend his webinar here at SHSU, his other one is called Listening People into Existence. Listening people into existence. Because people feel invisible, especially after COVID. They feel like they don't matter. I was doing a mediation with a wealthy family in a different state from here in person, and listened to an adult daughter in her late 40s say to her father, who was nearly 80, I just don't feel seen by you. I feel like it doesn't even matter if I was here and that nobody would miss me if I was gone. And this was on the heels of talking about how all of her other siblings were paid more money. And I spun around and looked at the dad who was sitting on the other side of me. And I said, did you hear what she just said? And he said, oh yeah, we can start to make it up by giving her some more money so she's equalized with her siblings. I said, well, time out. Did you hear the last two sentences of what she just said? And he said, no. And I said, so that she didn't have to repeat them, I said the last two sentences again. And he looked at me, clearly lacking the empathy gene, and said, I don't really understand what that means. And this is a person who had lost a daughter already to suicide in his family. And I had to spell out for him that those are the last two sentences people often say before they take their own lives. That person didn't have enough anger. She made a choice to go low and sad when she delivered that to him, but she could have also delivered it, and we've heard it before, standing and screaming at the table, I'm invisible to you, I don't matter to you. That's the warrior energy we were talking about that defends the hurt that she's feeling so desperately and needs to stop feeling. So speaking indirectly to the fear or hurt sounds like, wow, something I said really triggered you. I'm so sorry. Can we figure this out? Right? It acknowledges that it's a response. Good. The first step to being able to deal with anger is to step out of it and triangulate it. So it's really hard when there's a gun at your head and somebody is screaming across the table, a boss, a parent, a loved one, a teenager, if you're a parent, saying, I don't care what you say, and just blasting you with anger. The boss saying, you messed this up, and this, whoever's coming at you with all that anger, when they're coming right at you, even if it's not about you, if they're angry about somebody else, but they're still delivering the energy, the blow, the screaming at you, like this gun pointed at you, it's really hard to process the intellectual side of what that person's going through. So what we literally tell people to do is sidestep it. Tilt in your chair if you're sitting, or in your mind's eye, move over here. So the idea is, rather than being at the end of the gunpoint, like you might be here, take the perspective of the photographer of this picture and see, wow, look at that. That's somebody who's so angry with me, if this is you on the right, and look at it triangulated. See what's happening, but step out of your body if you can. Bring your awareness to a point where you can see the scene as an observer rather than as a participant. From here, you can see what's going on. From here, staring down the barrel, you can't. Because when you're staring down the barrel, your survival instinct is triggered. When you're looking at it from here, it's more like a movie, and you can see what's going on. You can narrate about it. You can see it. You can analyze it. And if you so Harvard calls this going to the balcony. And the question is, can you be both at the balcony where you're seeing the whole perspective and also still be in the room being yelled at, sitting across the desk or the dining room table or whatever the situation is? So this is in the direct line of fire. This is watching the line of fire. And this is being in both at the same time. So you're in the dance. You're the one being hollered at. And you also simultaneously can learn to hold the perspective of the person who isn't in the dance, who's watching this go on, because from there, you can see the fear and the hurt, and you can start to find your empathy for them. Because when you're staring down the barrel and you're being attacked with anger, with words or worse, you have no choice but to attack back. Your survival instincts kick in, and that's what happens. You fight back. You say, yeah, well, you did this. And you start one-upping them and fighting back and arguing. But when you step out of that from this perspective, you can see that there's somebody who's just going through a lot, and you can start to find some empathy for them. If you remember that this anger is covering for fear or hurt, then you can start to say, wow, they're really, really upset. And not in the angry kind of upset, but in their world is upended upset. You can speak to that part of them. So what we ask as mediators is, you seem really angry. And they say, damn right, I'm angry, or something like that, right? Then we say to them, what has you so angry? And they might say, you did this again, and you did it last week, and you did it the week before, and I'm sick and tired of it. The third question is very similar. And it's more about specifically, what about that makes you so angry? And if you can calm them down fast enough by that point, they're liable to say, my ex-wife used to do that to me, or my parents never listened to me, or something about themselves, where the first two answers were about you. So now they're recognizing their own stuff that's going on. And that's the step toward getting at that anger with them. 3 questions. You seem upset, you seem angry, you seem frustrated, whatever. Second, what has you so frustrated? Third question, but specifically, what about that frustrates you so much? And that's how you shift it from them being angry at you to them being self-aware. You can help talk them down that way. Next question, what about when it's about you? That's not a bad response. Humor's good sometimes. So here's what's happening. There's a situation. You have in your mind the optimal reaction that you want to have, but instead there's this current reaction, and Harvard Program on Negotiation calls that a performance gap. It's just quite simply a gap between what's actually going on, what you're really doing, and what you know you should be doing. We all have this gap in self-awareness sometimes. It's actually a keen self-awareness that there's a gap in our performance. I can't believe I'm saying these things right now, but the words are out of your mouth and you can't kind of catch them and stop them. Let's talk about the brain and why that is. So very simplified brain mechanics, brain biology. It starts down here with number 1. This is the reptilian brain. It sits right back here at the base of the skull, at the top of the spinal column. And what it really does is assess your safety. So that mechanism back here, that animal part of the brain, the reptilian brain, which is the very first one to develop in the womb and everything else, that's the one that says, am I safe? I'm safe, I'm not safe. I'm safe, I'm not safe. All day long, 24/7, from the day you're born to the day you die. What that means is until you feel safe, you can't move to the other parts of the brain, to the higher functioning parts. As long as your safety is triggered, that's got you fight, flight, or freezing in response to what's going on in front of you, because you're at the base level. Am I safe? Am I safe? Staring down the barrel of a gun, or staring into the face of somebody red in the face, veins bulging in their neck, screaming at you, is enough to trigger this, am I safe, am I safe, am I safe? And it hijacks the rest of your functioning power. Up here in area 2, the sort of center part of the brain is the limbic system. And within the limbic system is this little thing they call the amygdala, that is literally, it looks like 2 almonds sitting right here in the middle section of your brain. Those of you who study psychobiology, you can laugh at my simplicity here. Amygdala is actually the Italian word for almond, so named by the person who first discovered it. But this is the part that hijacks your emotional system. When you can't bring your feelings into check, it's because your amygdala has been triggered. And I like to think of this, again, in an overly simplistic way, as blood flow. When your animal instinct is triggered and you're afraid you're not safe, it's almost like the blood can't get to the front parts of your brain. It's not actually how it works, but it's easy to think of it that way. When it gets to the emotional parts of your brain and the amygdala hijacks it, it still stops your blood flow from there, so that you can't reach the neocortex, which is the executive functioning part of the brain, where we have rational thought and we can think linearly and logically. So our goal when we're dealing with somebody else who's angry is to figure out where they are. We have to meet them where they're at. So are they in survival mode? Are they in emotional overload? Or are they able to access rational thought? That's part of why we ask people who's the president of the United States when we think they might be having a stroke, because they have to, we ask them questions that make them see if they can access this part of their brain. So when you're having anger, it usually means your limbic system is overloaded, your amygdala is hijacked, and that emotion, the hurt or the fear that underlies the anger, is so strong that it's actually triggering your survival instinct, which is where the anger comes out to defend you. So again, this is very oversimplified, but it's just a very quick sort of perspective, a quick slide on how the brain functions and why we can't have rational thought and give good answers when we're in the presence of rage, or we're feeling it ourselves, or we fear for our very survival. So ways to think about why it happens the way that it does. So here's the start of the solution, especially when it's about you. There's a stimulus and a reaction. We usually hear stimulus response. Reaction is a response. It's one type of a response, but it's the knee-jerk reaction when they use a rubber mallet on your knee and your foot kicks out a little bit. It's autonomic like that. So you get an answer you don't like, or someone's angry with you, that triggers a reaction in you. The problem is usually that reaction comes out right away, like the rubber hammer to the knee, because it's an immediate reaction to the stimulus. The way to get around it when it's happening inside of you is to start to learn to detour. Trying to move myself. There we go. Start to figure out how to take a detour from this very deeply carved neural pathway in your mind that has given you permission. And let's be really clear. When one person is angry with another, whether it's conscious or unconscious, they've given themselves permission, especially on the conscious side, to be angry with you. They've made a decision that the benefit of the anger outweighs the cost that they're going to pay for being so angry and the risk to the relationship and everything else. So the goal when it's within you is to put this wedge of awareness in here to change your response so that what comes out isn't this knee-jerk reaction, but instead is a more thoughtful response that's measured and that's self-aware. So the whole idea of controlling your own anger is about inserting this wedge. It's about self-awareness. Take a breath, take a pause, check in with yourself and adjust. Now, here's what I like to talk to people about when it comes to doing this. Most people say, but how do I remember to take a pause? Or how do I can't just stop and take a breath when I'm upset. Actually, you can. What we're doing is we're breaking a cultural rhythm. We speak in our culture, and most cultures have their own rhythms, not the same as ours necessarily, where they go back and forth, ba-ba-bum, ba-ba-bum. I don't know, well, what do you think? Well, I think we could do this, but what do you think? Well, I think if we did it this way, then that might be better. No, I think this way might be better. But there's this ping pong style rhythm, padunk, 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 padunk. We respond, there's another response, and we go back and forth in this rhythm. We can get locked into this rhythm without realizing it. We get like hypnotized into it. And so when somebody says, yeah, well, you did it, and our knee-jerk response is to stay with the rhythm and come right back with, yeah, but you didn't, da, 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 da. And we're not giving ourselves time to think or to formulate the thought properly. The trick is catch the ping pong ball. Don't hit it back. Somebody says, yeah, well, you didn't, da, 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 da. Catch it. Hold it, think about it for a minute, and then respond more thoughtfully. You don't have to answer in rhythm, but first you have to be aware that you are, so that you can break the pattern and change the rhythm. Furthermore, I heard myself saying just now, you always this. Ken Cloak, who we spoke of a few moments ago, says, behind every accusation is a request. Behind every accusation is a request. So when someone says, you didn't take out the garbage and you didn't do it last week, and I had to ask you to do it the week before that, it's if you hold the ping pong ball and don't say, well, you did these things. If instead you catch the ping pong ball and hold it for just a moment, you can say, so it's really important to you that I take the garbage out. Okay, done. I can do that from now on. I didn't realize it mattered that much, and I'm really sorry. I will absolutely make sure that I take care of it from now on. And now you've answered the request that they didn't have the courage to ask for. So instead, they led with an accusation and some anger. So when you're hearing the accusation, try also to hear what's the request that's silent underneath it, that you're not getting to hear. That's going to get you to a response that's much more thoughtful and productive, or humor to break the rhythm or something like that. Good. So those of you who've studied conflict resolution with Mr. Gene Roberts or any of the others on this Zoom call may have seen the Thomas Kilmann response to conflict grid. This is very simple. So before you try to read the whole thing, let me just walk you through it. Across the bottom in the x-axis is the value or the importance of the relationship to you. So as it moves to the right, that's a higher and higher, more important relationship to you. The y-axis, the vertical one, is the importance of the issue to you. So when you go high on the issue, if it's really, really important to you, then you move higher into this grid. So what happens is, if the issue is really important to you, you're going to compete. Now, if you stop and ask yourself, I'll bet you could list 10 different things right now that all of society seems to be competing about right now. Vaccinations, masks, Supreme Court. I could always go back and fight about the stuff we've been quiet about for a couple of years, the things that people vehemently and passionately disagree about, like abortion and death penalty and things like that. There are plenty of things that are so important to us, mostly politicized things because they're good at making us disagree with each other. All of those, we've watched people, if not even ourselves, break off relationships with friends and family members because we've been competing because the issue is so important to us. What that does is it devalues the relationship. By the way, Gene, can y'all see my cursor on the screen? I'm seeing it, but I don't know if you can. No? Okay.
I do not see a cursor, no, sir.
Okay, all right. So what it does is it brings us left on the scale as we're devaluing the relationship because we're so high on the y-axis that we're competing so hard. So if the problem's not important to us and the person's not important to us, then we can avoid. And you know what? I should be able to draw on this too, but I don't think I can do all of this and screen share at the same time. So we avoid. There's no anger when we avoid, right? It avoids all kind of confrontation. And a lot of people prefer this, but what it does is it tells the other people in their life that those people aren't important to them because they're avoiding a decision or they're avoiding a response or an issue or a discussion. If the relationship is really high across the bottom and the issue's not that important, then we accommodate. So if my mom says to me one night, and she's 95 years old and still sharp as a tack, if she says to me one night, I really feel like sushi tonight, because she's from Tennessee, then you can bet what we're having for dinner that night, right? Because what I have for dinner doesn't matter to me very much. The issue is of very low importance. But my mom being happy, everything. So I'm going to accommodate. Absolutely, Mom, we're going to go for sushi. Which place would you like to go to or whatever? Okay. If it's a medium important relationship and a medium important issue, then we compromise. Somebody walks into, teenager comes to you for allowance and says, hey, I need $40 to go to the movies and get dinner. You might say, tell you what, here's 20, have fun. Or, whatever the numbers are these days. I can't see a movie in Los Angeles for $20, but anyway, I'm not even sure I can get one ticket for $20, but that's another subject. But we compromise. You go into the boss and say, hey, I got this project I want to do. I'm going to need $3,000. They say, tell you what, budget's tight this quarter. Let me give you $1,500. Do the best you can with it. What do you do next time you need $3,000 and you have to go to that boss? You ask for 6, don't you? Because you know they're going to say, budget's tight this quarter. Let me give you 3 so you can get by with it. So too much of one of these behaviors becomes predictable. And then the last one is when the issue is really important to you and the relationship is really important to you. It's a marriage, it's family, it's dear friends, it's a coworker that you work with closely, or your boss, or something like that, or a teacher about a grade. This is where you collaborate. This is where you invest the time to sit down and say, tell me how this looks to you. Let me tell you how I'm thinking about it. But I wanted to show you this grid so that you could see the different choices people have in response to conflict and anger, and to recognize that competing is pushing that anger all the way up, and that what it's doing, oh, I can move myself around, watch this. What it's doing is it's devaluing relationships because you're competing so hard because the issue is so important to you. So that's why the other questions before, you seem really upset. What has you so upset? And what about that's so important to you? Now you're going to get them to talk to you about it rather than compete with you about their being right. So again, from getting to yes in the Harvard program, you're arguing with anger. They're coming at you across the table or the conference room or whatever it is, the desk, the kitchen, saying, you never do this, or you're wrong about that, or you did this to me, or whatever. The goal is to get around the same side of the table and to target the problem together. That's what we do after we've de-escalated the anger, and trying and not let it restart by staying oppositional like the top picture with the issue between us. Next, we have to meet people where they are. And where I am is in the way there. We have to meet people where they are. It means we have to take them as they present to us. I've never found it very effective, though some people do it very well, that when somebody's screaming at them, they answer in the therapist voice and say, and how did that make you feel? And I've never been able to do that without sounding pedantic or condescending or some other fancy word for putting people down, right? So we got to meet people where they are and respect where they are, and then try and move them from there. So one of the things that's important to keep in mind is what we let others see of us is the part above the water if we're the iceberg. Whoops. Oh, but that's the whole iceberg, and this is just the part above the water, the little small part that's peeking up above the water. So the point of this is that it's always important. I don't know what happened to my slide here, I'm sorry. But it's always important to recognize that when we're seeing the part of other people that they're showing us, which may be the angry part, we've got to remind ourselves that there's this much more going on beneath the surface. And that's why we ask into it and we try and talk to other parts of them. So one of the things that's worth mentioning is we don't have to talk to the part of the person that they present to us. We have the choice to speak to other parts of them. So as mediator, I'll sit down with people and I have a plaintiff and a defendant, and I have a plaintiff's lawyer and a defense lawyer. If I talk to the defense lawyer like a lawyer, I'm going to get lawyerese back. But if I look at them and say, so do you have any children? And she says, yeah, they're 11 and 13, and I'd love to get this done fast today so I can get home to them. Now we've spoken to a different part of that person. I learned this lesson the hard way, speaking to a widow in a wrongful death medical malpractice lawsuit where she'd lost her husband. And I went in the other room where the doctor was with his insurance adjuster and his lawyer. And I started speaking to the part of the doctor who was the defendant and who didn't want to settle the case, he said. He wanted to go to trial. And I started arguing with his position and speaking to the defendant that was sitting in front of me. Finally, after 20 minutes or something, I got a good look into his eyes and saw all of a sudden how tired he was. I said to him, I changed up and I spoke to a different part of him and said, how long since you've had a good night's sleep? And his eyes went down to his shoes. And he stared at his shoes for about 25 seconds. Finally, he looked up to see if I was still waiting for the answer, and I was, because mediators, when we ask a good question, we got to make sure we get the answer. And he said, it's been a long time. And we were sitting here in this mediation only 4 months after the accident. The moment where he had given medical advice to a person who came to see him with chest pains. He said, I'm able to recreate it by pressing under here. I think you have a skeletal muscular issue, and sent him home with painkillers and muscle relaxers. And the guy had a massive coronary in the middle of the night, leaving behind his kids. So I asked him, so it's been about 4 months since you've had a good night's sleep? And he said, yeah. I said, I can't imagine what it must be like to be in your shoes right now. You're being accused. I mean, she called you a murderer. I can't imagine how he said, no, you can't. I said, help me understand. He said, you have no idea. And I said, help me understand. He said, I did. And he starts rattling off, 4 years of undergrad and 3 years of med school and residency and internship and da 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 da. And he builds up this head of steam until he's like screaming at me, because nobody had asked him in 4 months how he felt. And he's like screaming at me, saying, for all I know, the same symptoms could walk in today and I could follow the book and do what I was taught, and he could go home and die too. And how am I supposed to practice? And I mean, he just unleashed. So I saw behind that the very hurt person that was there and the very scared person that was there. And I spoke to that. And I said, but we need you. And he looked at me and said, what do you mean? And I said, we have no one else to go to who can help us get better but you. And even if you're not right all the time, we still need you. And he said, I never thought of it that way. And he started calming down. And I said, and we had this conversation, because he was like, when I leave here today, I have to go into my office, and what if that person dies too? And I get sued again and people call me a murderer. Like, how can I sleep? So talking to the fear and the hurt brought him down, because that was the whole of his iceberg. He was a good person trying to be a good person. And sometimes bad things happen to good people. And he probably misdiagnosed this person, but he did all the right things. He took all of his vital signs. He put him on an EKG, did all of these things to make sure the guy's heart was okay. And the tests looked like it was. So he did what he knew best from all of his training and things. There's more going on to the people in front of us. And as soon as we don't knee-jerk response to what they're showing us above the surface, and we recognize there's more down below, we can speak to different parts of them. So now let's talk very quickly about the anatomy of the dialogue. I'm watching we got 20 minutes till the first pitch. So first, inquiry, asking questions. Second, advocacy, sharing your thoughts or your experiences or something like that. And third, summarizing which parts you got back. Now they don't have to happen in this order. I would say asking questions first, summarizing what you've heard, and then deciding what to offer in response to that is a good balance in a conversation. But it should be sort of a third, a third, a third. The problem is the conversations that we have are generally, let's see if I can be tricky here and do this, they're generally all about advocacy. If we're talking about high stakes issues, vaccinations or masks or vaccination mandates or any of the things that people are talking about today, all we're doing is advocating on both sides. In fact, Gene Roberts is one of the few people I know who asks a question. What would happen if? Have we ever thought about doing something like this? He asks questions in the face of conflict, where most of us just advocate. So think about how you're approaching the dialogue, and are you talking back at somebody else, or are you asking to learn more? And then the summarizing is what we talked about earlier. It's so that they can experience themselves as being heard by you. It's not enough that you heard them, but they have to experience and know that you heard them. So we have to tell them by summarizing it back or by saying, I understand what you're saying. I see what you mean. I didn't realize that that's what had happened or whatever. So far, so good. This is a great quote. Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective and not the truth. That sounds to me like some new agey sort of thing. It's Marcus Aurelius. This is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years old. Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. And everything we see is a perspective, not the truth. We're becoming all too convinced of sound bites and truths these days, to the point that we'll go fight for the soundbite without recognizing that somebody else actually does see something different than us. This actually does look like 4 sticks on one side and 3 on the other. The other quote I like very much is, just because I know I'm right doesn't mean the other person's wrong. We tend to think that life is a zero-sum game and there aren't any shades of gray. Just because I'm right doesn't mean the other person's wrong. And the flip side, just because they're wrong doesn't mean that I'm right. The difference between an observation and an assessment. An observation says, I see what you mean, I see what you're saying, so you're saying this. An assessment is, you're saying this, but I don't believe it, or you're saying this, I heard that's not true, or you're saying, so this is an observation is inclusive and brings people close. It says, I'm listening to you, I'm hearing what you've said. An assessment pushes people away and gets them angry. This can be the triggering thing that makes other people's anger come out. So be mindful of whether your response is an observation of what you've just seen or heard, rather than an assessment or a judgment that argues back and tells them what you think of what they just said. That's different. Most people don't welcome that as much, right? If you tell somebody something that you just read and they say, oh, I heard that's not true, that doesn't feel very good, right? And if it's something really important, you're gonna say, actually, it is true because this is the source I got it from. And now we start ratcheting up and getting more toward anger because our feelings are hurt, because we don't feel listened to. Finally, when you're wrong, apologize. There's a website called perfectapology.com. I didn't make this up. I used it from their page. They have all kinds of apologies on their page. The perfect apology to a girlfriend, the perfect apology to a boyfriend, the perfect apology to friends, how to write an apology letter. Phenomenal website. So visit it when you have a moment. But they say an effective apology should always include a detailed account of the situation, acknowledgement of the hurt or the damage you did, take responsibility for it, recognize your role in the event, tell them that you regret it. Don't ever say, well, I didn't sleep much the night before and I was kind of grumpy that day and I just found out that my dog was sick. That's an excuse. That's not taking accountability or responsibility. It's not recognizing your role, and it's really not a statement of regret. Regret is, I'm sorry I did that to you. I really am sorry that happened. Ask for forgiveness. Promise that it won't happen again. Give them an assurance. And then finally, a form of restitution, which means one of two things. The best form of restitution is to ask them, what can I do to make it better? Your apology isn't done until you've done all of these things. You take responsibility, you take accountability, you acknowledge your role, you ask for forgiveness, promise it won't happen again, and then ask, what can I do to make it better? And it might be as simple as give me a hug. It might be as simple as it wouldn't be a bad thing if, in addition to taking out the garbage, if you did the dishes tonight, right? But ask, because then you're doing it with them. But if you decide on, the husband who said something stupid on the phone and brings home a bouquet of flowers that night, like every 1960s sitcom that ever existed, aging myself, saw them in reruns, I'm sure. But coming back home with a bouquet of flowers to say I'm sorry, that may not have been what she wanted, for everything that he did wrong. But if he says, how can I make it better? How can I make it up to you? Then she can say what she wants, and you have a choice of doing it or not. This is a full apology, the perfect apology. I'm going to send these slides, by the way, to Jean, who is has my invitation. I know they say copyrighted on the bottom, but my invitation is send them out to anybody who wants them, use them. This is not copyrighted material. I should have taken that off before the program. You have my permission. Share these, use these, take them to your fraternity, sorority, and share them with people. Put them up in the workplace on the bulletin board, whether it's just the apology piece or the whole thing. Share it with your teams at work. This is stuff that we all need to know. We all need to hear. And we all need to understand better than I think we do right now. Because right now, I think we're doing an awful lot of talking, not an awful lot of listening. We're responding with anger. We don't know why within ourselves we're doing that. And we don't know how to get out of the anger that we're seeing from other people. And we're seeing more of it than usual right now because everybody is pretty traumatized between COVID and being locked down for 18 months and police shootings and Black Lives Matter marches and All Lives Matter opposing those, and then the riots and everything else. We've a storm, an emotional storm the last 18 or 20 months. So we're seeing more anger than ever before. So feel free to share this video, share the slide deck with anybody and everybody you want to, families, whatever, so that people understand how to manage anger better and help people who are angry because they're the ones who need it the most. So I'm done lecturing. We've got about 10 more minutes for Q&A. Jean, I assume that you've been collecting some of those.
Yes, and I always take notes. I always take notes. And one of my observations, and there's some stuff in the chat I do want to get to also. One of my observations is, Lee J, not only generous with his time tonight, but allowing his intellectual property to be freely given. Again, this is inspiring and it's an example. And maybe if we could give more and not say, hey, this is mine, you can't share it, or I'm not going to allow you to share it, maybe we'd have a little bit better world to live in. A couple of comments. Firstly, Jay, at the beginning you asked, why are people here? And Jeremy said, and this is great that you're on here, he said that he's studying communications so that he can consult with musicians and their working professionals to communicate better. Do you have any experience working with musicians?
Boy, there's a softball. Yes, Jean knows that. Yeah, I've had my fair share of working with rock bands. Mostly when they're on the verge of breaking up, they're not speaking to each other. The ones I work with have literally had 2 different tour buses with their families separated because they weren't speaking to each other. Would show up and play a gig and go back onto their separate tour buses again. Yeah, in those situations, they're different than most partnerships because you're usually dealing with a lot more ego and a lot of third-party pressure. The record label, the business managers, the managers all want them to stay together because they're the goose that's laying the golden egg for everybody. The fans all want them to stay together and all of this, but they're real people who have real conflicts. And if they don't sort them out, they're going to break up like the Beatles and other bands who have through the years. So it's added pressure from the external piece to always be mindful of and aware of. You're not dealing in an incubator with just the 4 dudes who play instruments or whatever. So that's the most important piece of advice I can give you about that is recognize that they have egos, they have pressure, and they're very, very concerned about what they're putting out to the public and what that looks like and how they're perceived because they're living in a fishbowl, and that's different than most, mom, dad, and 3 kids and a dog at home.
Something else too.
They're also with that too, Gene. Sorry, they have that life at home, but most people don't think of it that way. Sorry.
Another thing too, I like to just bring to folks' attention, especially our students, is sometimes when you're in a leadership capacity, it's important to always learn. And Darcy Thompson placed a comment. Darcy's an outstanding mediator and has been and is in leadership positions with the Texas Association of Mediators. And she says that she's here tonight because she's had the opportunity to facilitate high conflict mediations but she's continuing to look to build her toolkit. And that's very inspiring too, and a great life lesson for people. Sonia asked this question, Lee J. Can we assume that people being often angry aren't feeling safe in their life?
Yes, I think that well said. I like to be careful about assuming too much about anybody. It's better to ask. That may be a tricky question to ask. You want to do a bunch of preliminary questions to sort of build that trust before you go with a question that important. But I like to keep them in the back of my mind as working hypotheses. And rather than addressing it directly sometimes, like saying, gosh, do you maybe not feel safe in your life? Like they might not even be able to process that. What I do is I try and give them safety and security as we're talking, with my voice, with the words I choose, with my pace, my tone, my body language. I'm not going to stand over them or something like that. I'm going to be really mindful of actually being lower than them so that they feel safe and empowered and they can sit closest to the door when we're having conversations. So I'm going to be thinking about how to make them feel safer in all of their interactions with me. As mediators, we're adjusting, we're fine-tuning those things all the time. I'm also watching who sits closest to the door, because typically that's the most unsafe feeling person in the room. So yeah, it's a great thing to keep in the back of your mind. And by the way, for those of you who do mediate or plan to, notice that one of the things that we like to do in the mediator's introduction early on is I like to say to them, no one's going to make you do anything today you don't want to do. This is your process. And you can just watch their shoulders fall as they take a deep breath and relax. And it gives them that safety so they can hear the rest of what I have to say after that before we get into the heart of the mediation.
We have another question, Lee J, from Jeff. In your opening story, how did you make the drunk guys laugh?
It was so simplistic. It was, so I went to I figured out very quickly sort of which team had won. And I said to them, you guys just won, right? You're going to the Stanley Cup finals. Is that right? And they said, yes. I said, so what are you doing standing here yelling at these guys on the sidewalk? Shouldn't you be out having a beer to celebrate? And they're like, yeah, we should. And the other guys, I said, come on, you have sorrows to drown, right? I mean, come on, you came all the way to DC. It wasn't for this, right? And I tried to give them something better to go focus on.
Deja has a comment, and she says that she's graduating from nursing school. Good. And that they use therapeutic communication when talking with patients, and she also works in healthcare. Lee J, do you have any experience working with healthcare professionals?
Gene, all these loaded questions. I think Gene also knows that I worked with a group of professors from Pepperdine's Strauss Institute, and we worked with groups of nurses at Children's Hospital in Dallas for a year or year and a half on collaborative communication skills. A lot of the same things, pardon me, that we teach mediators how to do. And I think it sounds a lot like what you're calling therapeutic communication skills, because we're trying to get underneath people's positions to their interests. We're trying to find where their interests are aligned. We're helping them think about the other person's interests and building some empathy and all those sorts of things. So it sounds like what you're doing too. And I think it especially nurses, because they're the hub of the wheel, and they take pressure from families and patients and doctors and shift leaders and administration and everything. So they're the shock absorbers who I think get the most pressure of anybody in that kind of a situation, in my experience. And most need to learn how to deal with this anger that we're talking about, but also the kinds of communication skills you're talking about. It's a great question.
We have another question. I think, well, I'm not going to comment on it. It's from David. He says, Lee J, isn't it supposed to be the mediator who sits closest to the door so they can be safe if physical violence erupts?
That's the hockey goalie mediation stance. Yes. I tend to do it the other way around. Believe it or not, David, I have always sat furthest from the door because I want them not to feel like I'm impeding their path. Because to me, one of the principles of mediation is self-determination. that the people at the table get to decide their outcome and everything else. And if somebody wants to get out and storm out of the room, or even pretend that that's what they're going to do because they're trying to negotiate, I don't want to be between them and the door. So I've always just habitually sat farthest from the door for that reason. Plus, it gives me a chance to walk by people on the way in and out of the room and things like that, which can give us little interactions and build rapport in small ways. So yeah, I like what you're saying though, David. I know that you're tongue in cheek when you say that, but you might also be doing it. There's no wrong answer.
Thank you.
We've got a couple of minutes left, if that's all right, Lee J. I know you've got your tri-tip and Cabernet and tofu to go to. It's getting dinner time there in California. Any questions from the audience? Any questions from the audience? You can unmute if you want.
I have a question, and I provided the question directed to Lee by mistake. My name is Arike. I'm from Southern Sudan.
Welcome, Arike.
And I find this is very interesting because people from Southern Sudan are people who just came out of a 21 years civil war. And there are people who are traumatized. And when you are speaking to them, the answers are always reflected with anger.
Say that again, Arike. The answers are always?
The answers, because of their trauma, the answers are always, the answer with the anger. And I found that this is much more interesting because here in Houston, I'm working with the communities.
Good.
And this is the the Southern Sudan community and the Rwandese communities, Somali communities are facing all these kind of challenges. And I found this as a good tool that I can use to continue telling, educating them about how to respond to things when they happen. And as they are here, there are people whom to get all this education, all this learning process to also enhance their own communities back home.
Yes. So
in those countries, you find that the Somalia, Southern Sudan, and the Congolese, the Rwandese, there are still continuous tribal conflicts in those areas. How would this, if you are going to give more of a presentation, would you allow me to get 3 or 4 of them to attend some of these trainings?
of course, absolutely. So I'm happy to do it with you with a group of them. I'm also happy to give you a link to this video if you want to just play it with them at your convenience and discuss it, whatever's easier for you. And the other thing that you just touched on that I think is really important is if they're constantly answering you with anger, one of the most important things you can do for them, because like us being locked down with COVID, they've been in this civil war environment long enough that it's changed their habits to being that way. One of the most important things you can do for them is model the better way to be. And by that, I mean, even at the risk that they might think you foolish, you can just smile a big smile and laugh a big belly laugh and show them how to be relaxed, show them how to be happy and positive. And when they ask you a question, you can answer just as nicely and kindly and humbly as possible to show them how to do it, to remind them how to do it. Because it's a behavior that's just at the outer edge of their known behaviors because it's not part of their frequently used ones. And so the more they see it in you, the more they can relax and see that it's okay to be comfortable and that they're safe.
Yeah, we have some frequent meetings, like for example, today, we had a meeting with them And my question, that's why I was asking if I would request, get time so that you can speak when you are in a meeting, something of that kind, you can be able to present some of this, such a thing, so that they may be able to learn how to deal with such a things.
Absolutely. Grab my email address from the slide here if you can see it. It's leejay@aim-institute.com. And if this doesn't, in fact, I wonder if I can copy and paste it in the chat. I'll put it in the chat for everybody. But I'm happy to have you email me and happy for us to figure out a time to do that.
Thank you.
There we go.
Lee J, a couple of concluding comments. One is from Elaine Roberts, no relation to me, but she is the excellent executive director of the Montgomery County Dispute Resolution Center. I should say the Dispute Resolution Center of Montgomery County. She says, thanks for an excellent presentation. As you know, they do a wonderful bookmark art contest where they go into Montgomery County schools and teach the kids about conflict resolution and anti-bullying. And she says, would you like to come back to help us judge the bookmark art in April 2022?
Absolutely. I would love to, Elaine. Thanks for the invitation. I had so much fun doing it. The Montgomery County program is one of my very favorite in the entire country. I love the work that they do in the schools. The reach that they have is unbelievable. The bookmark promotion that they have stretches to thousands and thousands of kids in the schools who learn about conflict resolution and then make bookmarks for people reading books about conflict resolution with beautiful art and great sayings on them. And I had so much fun judging the year that I got to, and I would love to come back. And of course,
it is a difficult job because all the artwork is wonderful. You're like, well, does this third grader really deserve it or not? No, just joking. They're all wonderful. Last comment, and this is going to be from Sarah, and I think it reflects what everyone tonight, Lee J. She says, love the presentation. She's a mediator and a mental health professional. She works with clients who have a history of trauma, which will often present as anger, ignited by various triggers. However, the reactions from a deep wound, that hurt and fear that you described. Thank you for the presentation. Love the conflict resolution emphasis of acknowledging the individual's hurt. And my goodness, how much better would our world be if we shared with each other and we acknowledged with each other, hey, we're hurting. How can we help each other? Lee J, you have inspired all of us today and tonight. Thank you so much. Thanks for putting up with my corny jokes and all that kind of stuff. You're a treasure. Love to have you come to Texas, either virtually again or in person. Just thank you so much. If y'all are interested in the slides, if you would shoot me an email. I'll drop mine in there so you can have it, and we'll get them to you when we get them to you. Please have some patience with us. And this is being recorded, and we'll shoot out a link as well once we get that downloaded and then uploaded and all that.
I also see Miss Lindsay Lunsford here in the chat and on the screen, and we should thank her because she's almost as responsible as you are, Gene, for making this happen tonight.
She is more responsible. She is our professional administrative associate, and she just does a great job in the office. And so thank you for recognizing her. She does deserve a lot of recognition. And so thank you, Lindsay. We know you got a lot on your plate. Thanks for taking the time to be here and making this work. Mm-hmm. All right. Thank y'all very much for being here today. Let's go out, spread the good word. Y'all have a good night, and go Stros.
Thank you, everybody.